A new Omnipoll has revealed that, Omnipoll, geez, glad it's not Omicron. A new Omnipoll has revealed that almost half of all Australians now back nuclear energy for electricity generation, with the strongest support in the over 65 age group, and surprisingly, those aged 18 to 34 years old, the greenie hippies. So why this sudden shift in the attitude towards a nuclear-powered future in Australia? Joining me now is Robert Parker, the former president of the Australian Nuclear Association and founder of Nuclear for Climate Australia. Thank you for joining me, Robert.
Good to speak with you tonight, Caleb, and I hope your viewers get a lot out of this.
Well, so this poll shows that the total support for nuclear energy for electricity production in Australia grew from 42% to 48% in this survey. Are you surprised by these results, Robert?
I'm not, Caleb. I've seen 2 or 3 other polls. There was one from Essential Polling recently. And we have seen some of these polls, depending upon the question that's actually asked, how it's framed, variously as high as 60% in favour. So Australians in general are warming to the idea of nuclear energy, and it's great to see because it would certainly lift the industrial and intellectual level of this nation if we could get on board with it.
Well, there's 2 things I can see that might have helped prompt this. One is the recent COP conference in Glasgow, but I think the other one that's sort of opening up the discussion now is the fact that we are doing this AUKUS deal, which means nuclear submarines. And of course, in response to that, we had people like Adam Bandt from the Greens saying, oh, you know, we're going to have mini Chernobyls floating off the coast of Sydney and all of this kind of thing. But I think it's actually reopened the discussion in Australia about the possible benefits and cons of nuclear energy. And really, why should we not be having this discussion?
I think it's interesting too that after the nuclear subs deal was announced, it didn't create any significant divisions or concern within the Australian public, nor at the political level, apart from the Greens, and one can always imagine that they'll go a bit spare over anything. It's been done probably with this continued threat of the Chinese impact in the Southeast Asian region in the background. But really, Australians see it as essential for the defence of the nation, our ability to project our defence beyond our territorial waters, for example. But really, what it does is that if we, as Australians, are prepared to use nuclear energy to defend the nation, then we better be looking at nuclear energy to also defend our economy and maintain it, so we can pay for these defence assets and also grow the economy. We certainly need to be doing that, and we need to be doing that in the atmosphere of reduced emissions intensity. And that's what came out of the Glasgow summit, where we went into Glasgow not thinking that nuclear would have a place in the table, but it certainly did. Because the thing that actually happened at Glasgow is that the wind failed. Prices of energy in the United Kingdom and throughout Europe are currently trading up at around 200 British pounds per megawatt hour. Convert that to Australian dollars, and you're talking about a price, wholesale price, 6 times ours. Now, that's on the back of failing wind and massive costs of gas that are hitting the UK. They're going right through Europe. And they're having a big rethink in Europe right now about going down this renewables plus gas route, because you've got unreliable on one side in terms of the wind delivery, but you've got the political point scoring over the gas supply. You either go to the Middle East or you go to Putin's Russia, but you're caught between a rock and a hard place. And strategically, it's not a very smart thing to do. So people in Europe are
Well, I would have thought, you know, all the greenies, they want this zero emission power. We know that nuclear is a zero emission form of power, and yet they seem to steadfastly stand against it. So I have to ask the obvious question: what are the benefits of nuclear energy to the environment?
Okay. Nuclear energy in terms of its benefit to the environment, is probably the most sustainable form of energy we've got. And what I mean by that is that it uses about 5 to 10% of the materials intensity of wind and solar. I mean, it is really low footprint. So all the raptors on our far-flung forests, they're not killed. I mean by that, the eagles and things like that, they're not getting cleaned up by wind blades and that sort of thing. It's a very low footprint. That means we also get this massive reliability because it's very low carbon. I mean, recently the Nordic nuclear plants calculated their carbon footprint at around about 12 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. Now, there is nothing lower than that. Wind is up around 30 and solar is up around 80. But of course, both of those need a lot of storage. And when you start talking adding batteries, and you start to add all of the paraphernalia that goes with intermittence, your carbon footprint is going sky high. So 2 issues, low materials use and extremely low emissions. And they're the real benefits, the environmental benefits.
And I mean, Australia is such a vast nation that I couldn't really think of anywhere better in the world to have nuclear energy. You know, people forget that there's a nuclear reactor at Lucas Heights in Sydney. Nuclear energy is used all over Europe and the US, and no one ever worries that, you know, there's going to be some massive attack there. We are a massive country. But the problem we have is that nuclear energy is currently banned. So there's no encouragement for anyone to actually do a cost-benefit analysis and look into the economics of running nuclear energy because they've got nothing to gain from it. Surely it is time we lift the ban on nuclear energy and we have this discussion seriously once and for all.
Well, look, we have looked in a lot of detail. I've got a colleague, Dr. Robert Barr, who's an expert on the grid, and he and I collaborate on the economic analysis of this. Nuclear is moving on. Our Commonwealth cousins in Canada have just agreed that they're going to build the first of what's called the BWX-300, a very simple, very low-cost nuclear power plant. Poland's going to build 10 of these. These things are starting to get into their straps. Now, why I mention them? In Australia, we have got a very, very long grid. It's a delicate grid. We can put these small nuclear power plants on our grid where the old coal-fired power plants were, or at the major substations all along it. And we can power our nations, as you suggested, with the uranium that we've got. And we can go from Townsville in the north right down to Gladstone, coming through into Brisbane, and then we can go into New South Wales, into the Upper Hunter. We can come down here into the Illawarra, near where I live, and we can go into Victoria. We can put these right throughout the nation. We need about 24 gigawatts of them. And it's an ideal source to get us underway with low cost. Now, our analysis has shown that if we go for nuclear energy, we can have energy, we can have low carbon energy at about half the cost of going down the route of 100% renewables, half the cost. Now, people say, well, how's that possible? Wind and solar are cheap. Sure, they're cheap. But what people don't realise, when they get their electricity bill, about half of their electricity bill is the poles and wires. And we know that for the renewables, AEMO wants another 10,000 kilometres. That's 10,000 kilometres of transmission to be built to get us to these renewable pipe dreams. Now, we know just recently, Transgrid, they had a budget of 1.3 billion to link New South Wales up to Snowy Hydro 2. That's blown out to 3.4 billion. If we're going to think we're going to build 10,000 kilometres of additional transmission, we are in for serious economic pain. If we put the nuclear in, we don't need to do that. We just use our existing grid. That's where the economics come from.
Common sense stuff. I hope someone wakes up and listens to it. Robert, thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you, Caleb. It's really good to listen, and I'll ask the your audience to think about where their real costs of energy are coming from and how regional Australia particularly can get some really smart jobs and have a good time as we transition to low carbon energy. Thank you.
Indeed, and I think we have about a third of the world's uranium deposits here too, so we should be doing something about it.